I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
So now let's get back to 81. I want to at least kind of set the stage before we take our mid-meeting break. So as you recall last couple of meetings, we divided up chapter 81 into 3 sections. Section 1, section 2, section 3. We got through section 1, no problem. That was about not debating. And the reason for not debating is because in debates, people are using beautiful but deceptive words, and they're also putting on a deceptive front, a facade of being broad of knowledge. So even when debates don't end up in some sort of conflict, like a shouting match, even when that is not the case, even when things appear to be very scholarly and civilized, and it seems like a very nice exchange, polite, even when that is the case, there's so much about it that is fake, so much about it that's disingenuous that a real cultivator of the Tao would be averse, would not prefer to be involved with any kind of debate. So after section 1, we got into section 2, which is about the actions, the behavior of the sage. They do not accumulate. They assist other people. They give to other people. So they don't just help other people. They also give other people various material and immaterial encouragements, positive remarks, encouragement, etc. And the more they assist, the more they possess, the more they give, the more they gain. This is what I want to focus on today. Specifically, I want to focus on line 9, giving. So in this particular line, the Chinese character for giving is the 3rd character, and this is an ancient usage. That particular character is almost never used that way anymore. Today, in Asian spirituality, when you talk of giving, it's usually in a way that is very much influenced by Buddhist thought. So the concept is a different character, a character Shi. And I want to focus on that character. There are different ways that you can give or practice that teaching of generosity. Shi. Several different ways, 3 different ways. And each one is distinctive, and each one has a different result in life, a different karmic consequence, you might say. So that is what we're focusing on, and it'll begin with a quick recap of what we talked about in the last meeting. And when we do a recap, there's no line-by-line animation because you've seen all of that material before, so the full screen comes up. So this is the character I was talking about, Shi, and the meaning is to give or to practice generosity, the origin of that term and the different categorizations from Buddhist teaching, and which, as you guys know, in the Tao, there's no need to distinguish between, their teaching, our teaching. Truth is universal. Wisdom is universal. If something is good, if something is helpful, if something really applies to life, there's no reason for us not to accept wisdom and truth from any tradition. So we went through this last time, and I wanted to highlight a very distinguishing feature of giving from a spiritual context. That is, the more you give in accordance with the Tao, the more you receive. And in the Tao, it's because the more you give, the more you resemble the characteristics of the universal source, the more Tao-like you become. The Tao is the source of creation. Everything comes from the Tao. Tao provides abundantly, which is how we get to live, how we get to have life. We have sunlight, we have water, we have air, everything we need to survive. So the more that you provide a nurturing assistance or help or things to other people, resources to other people, the more Tao-like you become. The more you begin to emulate and resemble the universal source, the ultimate source. And that's why if you give in accordance with the Tao, you are never lacking. And the metaphor that I used last time, while parking on this page before we continue, the metaphor I used previously is that of a well. And there's a little bit more to it than I was able to get into last time. We'll talk about that when we come back from break. But the idea is that a lot of people have a mathematical add and subtract concept when it comes to giving. Like life is a zero-sum game. So if I give you more of what I possess, I have less of it. You have more of it. Zero-sum. Everything add up to be the same value. There's no increase or decrease. But in reality, centuries of observation have revealed that's not the case. When you give in accordance with the Tao, it's like drawing water from a well. The more you provide that water to other people, you don't get less water in the well. The well doesn't dry out. You just keep finding that more and more water has been replenished, so you can continue to give. And in fact, people who have received your water, they're very thankful, and they will return the favor. And that's the focus of what I want to get into when we come back from the break. All right. So a question that I received in connection to the well is how this metaphor can apply to real life. In real life, what we have seen, what we notice is that people who give in accordance with the Tao, they enjoy abundance and prosperity. So if you apply that back to the metaphor, does that mean that the well in the water keeps on increasing? How would that work until it's like overflowing? Well, no, not actually. So to be clear, when we begin this particular metaphor, what I said was that the people that hold on to their well and don't share any of the water, they notice that the water in the well is always at that level, at a particular level. So they have enough for themselves. They don't give out any to others, so they always have water. The people who do give water to others to help other people slake their thirst, they discover that they still have that same level of water. That water keeps coming into the well. They're able to draw more and more from it. It's okay. But the prosperity in this particular metaphor comes into play when the people who have been given water because they don't possess a well of their own, they are very thankful. They are appreciative, and they demonstrate that appreciation by coming back to help with various resources to help you keep the well functional and working and new. So perhaps the rope that's used in the well has been frayed in the passage of time. So then the rope maker comes back with a brand new rope to replace the old rope to keep it working well. And a carpenter who notices that the wooden structure in the well is showing signs of age. So he brings back, wooden planks, his tools, and he fixes everything up. And someone else comes back with to apply a coat of paint, keep it looking very nice. So these are all resources that people who have been helped can come back and return to you. Now, all of which means that you then have additional time and resources to do other things with your time, which in the world represented by this metaphor just means that the owner of the original well goes on to dig other wells And as he is digging additional wells, he gets help from other people that he has previously helped. So before you know it, the one well becomes multiple wells, all giving refreshing water to the people. And it doesn't matter how big your family grows, you know, your kids grow up, have their own families and so forth. They too have sufficient water. They too can practice the giving of the Tao by providing water to other people. In real life, that means at some point, as you live a life in accordance with the Tao, prosperity is yours, abundance is yours. You realize that you never really want for material things again. You always have enough. You always have what you need. You always have what you want, and you can even further expand your outreach in giving to charitable causes to help other people with your various resources in different ways, and it goes on like that. So anyone who contributes in accordance with the Tao, who gives, who practices this particular kind of giving called 财师, that person is guaranteed to become the owner of multiple wells. Or another way to say it is that that person is guaranteed to enjoy prosperity and abundance in life, so that that person can give even more, can practice 财师 even more. So let's move on from this metaphor and explore the different categories. And last time I also talked about the ways to give, how to give with integrity. You know, don't try to act generous when giving something that belongs to someone else. You're not really generous. You're just acting as a conveyance. And you want to do so with wisdom. As I mentioned, a particular Buddhist master taught that you want to be careful not to, for instance, give weapons to criminals. You want to do so with wisdom. Giving weapons to criminals is not a sign of your generosity. It's a sign of you lacking wisdom. And then we also talked about not forcing it on yourself. If you don't feel it, if you don't really understand and identify with this teaching, then, you know, my best advice will be to wait until you actually grasp 100% with not just your intellectual mind, but also your whole being. When you identify with this, giving is very easy. When you have to force yourself to give, that's not the Tao. And also, lastly, to do so without picking and choosing people to give to based on external, you know, maybe their background, maybe their ethnicity, or whatever other superficial dividing lines that society has fostered upon us. So these are just some of the teachings surrounding the giving. And now let's cover the three aspects, the three categories of shi. So last time we talked about 财师, that's monetary, material contribution, donation. And got to be careful to make sure that it's to help people in need. The saying, the expression that we went through previously was 雪中送炭, which means to deliver coal in the middle of a snowstorm to someone who desperately needs it to keep warm. So that's the way that this kind of help can best be practiced. Not giving something to someone who really doesn't need that something, but to look for people who are desperately in need. And then 法师, the second category is the dharmic giving, or the giving of dharmic wisdom. And it's not just spiritual teaching. I'll get into more details, but it's everything that's a product of the mind, everything that's an insight, whether it's spiritual or secular. And then 无畏师, the last category is the giving that is quote unquote without fear, the giving that is courageous, giving that is proactive. And this is where you help the helpless. This is where you take definite action. And again, I'll talk about that in more details. So to dig into Tai Shi a little bit, which we did last time, I want to provide an additional example. There's a famous author, financial consultant, who's written a lot of best-selling books on money, on managing your finance. She is a great speaker, has her own show, and captivating whenever she's up on the podium talking about money. She's able to keep it really funny, but also very informative. And she, prior to becoming an author, had worked for many years as a financial consultant. So one day she got this idea. There was the inkling of an indication for her that the people among her clientele, the clients that are the most generous in giving, they all seem to do really, really well. So she wanted to be scientific. She wanted to see if that was actually true. She actually went through her files, all the files that she kept on her clients, and she looked for the ones that constantly had a regular practice of giving to charities, favorite charities that they're always giving. And she saw, proven to her satisfaction, that this was true. The people who gave the most also did extremely well in terms of finance, in terms of monetary wealth. So she puzzled through it, and she realized that when you give, you are creating a position of power for yourself. How does it make you feel when you are in a position to give? You feel powerful, and you can use that power, you can channel that power into making things happen in life for yourself. So this is, of course, not, as I mentioned previously, not giving the shirt off your back to someone, not giving in a way that damages your ability to continue to give. At the same time, there's proportionality, which means that no matter where you happen to be in life, you can give something. So probably for all of us, giving just a few dollars, is not a big deal. And in fact, that's what we ought to do. Those of us that have more of an ability to give should do that as well. So these are all within the guidance of the Tao. So for this particular author and speaker, her discovery is exactly the same thing that the ancient sages had spoken of from the Tao tradition, from the Buddhist tradition, that when you are willing to give material things, it's detachment, it's understanding that, this is it. This is life. We're not making out of this alive. None of us is going to make it out of this alive. We can't take anything with us, so we may as well do something good and positive and life-affirming with it. To adhere to proportionality means it's in proportion of where you happen to be in life. Whatever your current situation, there's always an amount that you can give that you can give very comfortably, that you won't miss. And to let go of attachment means that you recognize you can't grasp onto anything, because when you go, it'll be the exact same way as when you came into this world, with nothing. So when it's done right, it always works the same way. Resources go out in obvious ways. You know about them. You can track them. It's very obvious. But prosperity comes back to you in less obvious ways. It's impossible to track. It's impossible to figure out exactly when the next thing is that will come back to you through the karmic mechanism, but it always does happen. And it's not on a schedule, so you can anticipate it and say that, today's Monday, I should have some positive karma coming back to me today. It unfortunately does not work like that. It has its own schedule. It may not happen for a while. All I can tell you is that it's always going to happen. I just can't tell you when. And the source of the goodness that comes back to you seem completely unconnected to the recipient that having given the goodness that you gave out. So let's talk about 法师. This is the Dharma sharing, the sharing of your insight, your mind, your wisdom to benefit others. So it could be spiritual, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be a skill. It could also be tips to improve yourself, suggestions. So anytime that you are in the role of a teacher, you're teaching other people something that will benefit them, that is 法师. Of course, the most powerful is when you provide a substantial help in spiritual matters. Now, I seem to be contradicting myself when I say substantial help in spiritual matters, but sometimes it's extremely important to the recipient of your help when they are desperately in need of spiritual advice. If you are there to guide them toward a good path and away from a destructive path, they may not have that guidance without you. If so, it can be, this Dharma giving can be at its most powerful. Perhaps you, by giving them this Dharmic assistance, you're able to relieve them of fear, anxiety, and suffering. In general, anything that we can do to reduce or decrease the suffering of sentient beings, that is a great merit or a great goodness. And then lastly, as an example, if you inspire people to go further, to do more, to live up to their full potential, even potential they're not aware of, you cause them to go further than they thought possible, that can be a very powerful manifestation of this kind of giving as well. 法师. Now, let's also cover the last category, 无畏师. So, unlike the first two categories, 3 characters. First character, 无, means to have none. And second character, 畏, means fear. And then the last character is the same, 师, that's a Buddhist practice of giving. So, giving without fear, what is that? It's all about the proactive kind of giving. It doesn't literally mean that someone lives free from fear and so forth. It means that you have this spiritual courage to do what needs to be done. So let's use some examples to make it clear. Suppose you encounter someone who is lost. They don't know their way. They want to get to a particular place, but they have no idea where to go. So you could do a bunch of different things. You could say, sorry, I can't help you. Or you could say, oh, just, give them directions. Go this way, go that way, go this way, go that way. And then you're there. Oh, you're welcome. That's one way to do it. Now, it's not quite at the level of 无畏师 because it's not as proactive as if you were to say, oh, I know exactly where that is. Let me take you there. I have some time, so let's go. It's this way. So how you doing? Are you late for an appointment? Well, in that case, we better hurry on our way. So when you are so proactive and willing to go the extra mile, that you not just give directions, but to take someone to a place, nearby, go out of your way on their behalf, then that's one example. That's a good example of 无畏师. Another example, someone really needs to talk, okay, and there's nobody to listen to them. So you decide to be proactive. You sit down with a friend who's going through a rough patch. You lend a sympathetic ear. And you may feel like, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm just listening. Well, actually, to listen, in accordance with the Tao, that's a remarkable action in itself. And for you to be willing to do that, for you to be willing to set aside some time for your friend, that's being very proactive. So that's also 无畏师. And here at this temple, we see many examples of 无畏师. We see, I see many members of the congregation show up very early in the morning. And the reason why they show up early is because they get the the cleaning supplies, they get the equipment, they start cleaning all around. So nobody told them that they have to do this. They decide to volunteer themselves. So this would also be another example of the courage and being proactive. So there's no doubt that when I see someone like that, I'm witnessing 无畏师 in action. So last example, and I see many people like this also at this particular temple. The people who show up 8 o'clock in the morning and they start cooking. When you're cooking for so many people, you have to start early. There's a lot of preparation. There's vegetables to be cut. There's a lot of things that you have to do to start cooking that early at 8 o'clock in the morning, and volunteer to cook, to do some cooking so others can sit down with a hot meal after a long day. Wow, that's being very proactive. That's to cook for someone else. There's something very special in that action, to be nurturing, to provide food, sustenance, so they can continue going. So that is also 无畏师. So these are the 3 different examples. 财师、法师、无畏师, which oftentimes is talked about in Buddhism. So after centuries of observation, sages have noticed that those who follow the teaching of 财师, that's the giving of monetary things, they will enjoy abundance in their lives. And in the metaphor for which we speak, it means the well is more than replenished. Or as I mentioned just a while ago, it means that you get to build additional wells that supply not only your own family, your own extended family, all of your friends, but also other people that you want to help. So what about 法师? What about the giving of dharmic wisdom or your knowledge? When you practice 法师, you follow this teaching, you become wiser and more enlightened yourself. And this is something that I see quite often. This is actually what I advise people to do when they say, how can I make spiritual progress? I'll tell them that there's a couple of different ways to do it. One way is to be able to practice cultivate spirituality with another person, to take advantage of the yin and yang synergy that will occur in that fusion. That's one way to do it. The other way is this. The other way is if you were able to put yourself in a position on a regular basis, on schedule, to talk about what you have learned, the insights that you have gained, things that you have figured out for yourself, things that actually work in your life. If you can do that to other people, that has an unbelievable effect of accelerating your own progress. And the reason is simple. In order to explain something to somebody else, you have to get it super clear in your own mind. You have to get it clear first. It has to be organized, neatly organized, and you have to be at 100% clarity. Then you feel comfortable explaining it to someone else. That very process of organizing something to talk about, that benefits you perhaps even more than the person that you are benefiting. And lastly, what about 无畏师? What about the people who are very proactive in helping others, who take action, definitive action? They don't wait to be ordered or commanded to do something. Well, those who follow the teaching of 无畏师, they gain great health and enjoy long life that is busy and full of meaningful activities. So there's a lot of joy associated with all 3 forms of giving. But I have seen definitely the people who practice the last category, the volunteers here at the temple, who are cleaning everything up, sweeping the floor, vacuuming the rug, whatever, and cooking for everybody. These are the people with a big smile. Every time I see them, they have this big smile. There's a joy that they're definitely experiencing. So there you go, the 3 categories of 知, the teaching, the spiritual teaching on giving. So now that we've talked about giving, we're able to leave section 2 of 81. We're now on section 3, the last section. So that section begins with 天之道. 天之道, the few characters are in sequence. Number 1, the character 天 for heaven or sky. Second character 知 for apostrophe s. And the third character, Tao, that's just the Tao. So you can translate it as heaven's Tao, or heaven, the heavenly way, or the way that I translate it, the Tao of heaven. So this is a specific term, has a specific meaning, and it answers one of the most pressing questions that many people have when they come into contact with Tao teachings. A lot of times they will ask, well, the Tao includes everything, right? But you're telling me that I should walk the Tao, the path of goodness, you know, like charity and friendship and compassion and this and that, you know, as opposed to the Tao of cruelty, the Tao of violence, the path of contention, as an example. So you're telling me about this Tao that's not everything, but that's a subset of everything. That's a small part of everything, the positive stuff. So when we talk about the Tao, which is it? Is it the Tao that includes absolutely everything, good or bad, or is it just the good stuff? You know, that's a very persistent question. And this is 天之道 is a specific term to answer that question. So the all-encompassing Tao includes everything that we, human beings, would judge as good, plus everything we judge as bad. So the human judgment here is important because we can only evaluate from our own perspective. Something that is good for us would include things like friendship and love, connection with other people, etc. So if you take a look, if you take sort of a sneak preview at the next line where it says benefits and does not harm, so it's being very specific here. Lao Tzu is saying that the heavenly Tao is that which benefits and does not harm. So does it include everything or not? That's the question. So it is specific that we're talking about the positive aspects that benefit us, that does not harm us. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, before we get to the specific meaning, I want to provide a note here that is actually quite important. So, despite popular belief, you know, we here in North America, in the Western world, we're surrounded by the belief that God, the concept of God is central to morality, that without God there can be no morality. That's not what I believe, but I do know that's what many of my friends believe. Many of the people I know will look to that and say, oh yeah, that's true. That, you know, God, morality, that is the supreme authority on what is moral and what is not. What I want to note here is that the concept of God is not absolutely 100% necessary to help us distinguish good from bad, moral from immoral. So that's actually a new concept for many. That's actually maybe even heretical belief for some, that what you want to do without God and apply your flawed human judgment as to what is moral and what is immoral. Well, what is your standard then? You don't have the Ten Commandments to tell you what is right and what is wrong. You don't have the scriptural teachings to tell you what is right, what is moral, and what is wrong, what is immoral. So many people say that, and that's why I have this particular graphic here. If there's no God, there's no objective morality. That's actually it's a screenshot from a YouTube video on that very topic. So let me dispense with that first. What do we mean by what is good? What do we mean by what is moral? So if if we know not a whole lot about the history of the world, but we just observe the world today from a perspective of detachment, to be dispassionate and look at how the world is doing, please see the opposite of what is claimed. The claim is that God equates to moral authority. You must have God in order to be moral, etc., in order to be good. What we see in the world today is that the areas with the highest religiosity also have the most problems and the greatest suffering. That's true when you look at the world as a whole. So the areas of the world, the hotspots, the conflict zones, those oftentimes have the most fanatical beliefs, the most, I want to say backward, but that may seem like a term of disrespect. But, you know, the people who are extremely devoted to their religions, that's also where there's a lot of bloodshed, there's a lot of human misery, there's a lot of suffering. There's no denying it. That's just objective reality. If we keep our focus to the Western sphere, European countries, US, Canada, Australia, etc., the English-speaking parts of the world, we notice actually the same pattern, that the areas in the United States will be the states, the areas that are the most religiously fervent tend to be the ones with the most problems. And the metric is clear. Whether you're talking about teenage pregnancy, crime, even hate crimes, even infant mortality rates, measure after measure, the areas that are the most religious do the most poorly. That's what the numbers are demonstrating. That's what they're dictating. So I will propose that we not argue with reality and just see reality as it is. So if it is indeed true that you need to have God to be the moral authority, then that's not reflected in the state of the world today. So this idea, this particular YouTube video starts with the statement, without God, murder isn't wrong. Well, that isn't so. We can look at this from a wider perspective in the history of humanity, and we know that there are many traditions around the world where murder is clearly wrong, but without God saying so, without the equivalence of the Ten Commandments saying so. We have also seen secular formulations of ideas and concepts that will make murder wrong without any involvement of any deities whatsoever. Those of you who have been listening probably recall from maybe half a year ago that I mentioned the original formulation of the Golden Rule from Confucius is actually the negative formulation. In the Golden Rule, we talk about how do unto others what you would rather that you would like for them to do unto you. That's the positive formulation, to do something to other people. Confucius had the opposite. He had the negative formulation, not negative in terms of bad, but negative in terms of what you don't want for yourself. Don't do it to other people. So they seem like logical mirrors to one another, but in reality, Confucius' formulation is far superior. Because do unto others what you would like to do unto you, what you do unto others may be completely unwelcome. And, we recently have had a lot of news about inappropriate behavior in the workplace. People are coming out with complaints. So that is a case where maybe you would like to have that done unto you, but it's very inappropriate for you to do unto others, that you will be completely unwelcome. But if you stick to what Confucius says, then what he says holds remarkably well. What you don't want for yourself, don't do it to other people. So if you don't want to die, if you don't want to be killed, if you don't want to be tortured, don't do it to other people. So that's completely secular, and yet it tells us that murder would be wrong. So, without God, I can say, well, the individual preference to self-preservation will do quite nicely to make murder wrong just by recognizing the circular nature of life, that if you were to practice the way of murder, to walk the path of murder, that it will come back to you and you will be murdered as well. If you would prefer to not have that happen, then as Confucius would say, well, don't do it in the first place. So that would make murder wrong. Individual preference to self-preservation, that by itself can make murder wrong. So if you extend that to humanity, we're talking about the Tao for all of humanity now. So you can think in terms of that which is good, we regard it as good or positive if it contributes to the survival and flourishing of the human species. So you would not want to do things that we regard as bad because it will be contrary to the survival or flourishing of the human species. Why is it a bad thing to steal, to rob from one another? Well, because it's contrary to the flourishing of the human species. Why is it a bad thing to practice something like genocide? Well, because it's contrary to the survival of the human species, etc. So in that statement, there are no deities involved, but we can still formulate quite easily what is good and bad, what is moral and immoral. So it's not necessary. Now, those that have a deep-seated belief in God, who are very devout practitioners, my hat is off to them. I really respect them. At the same time, I also don't want them to look down upon others who don't have the same foundation belief and feel like somehow they have moral superiority, So what I'm saying is that people who are religious can be extremely moral, good, kind, compassionate, more power to them. At the same time, those without a religious practice, or maybe a different religious practice than theirs, they can be just as moral, kind, compassionate, etc. So let's come back to the Tao. So we're talking about the Tao of heaven. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means nature. The Tao is nature. Synonymous with nature. So let's think about from the human perspective, what is part of nature? If you are a human being, you have human level sentience and intelligence. That's part of nature. And that's part of the Tao. So for you to exercise your intelligence, your mind, to figure things out about nature and to do things in accordance with that understanding, that's very natural. That's what you were born to do. That's what you are meant to do with your nature-given mind, your nature-given sentience, your nature-given intelligence. And if you prefer to say Tao-given intelligence, that's cool. If you prefer to say God-given mind, God-given intelligence, that's also cool. So remember, we have sentience and intelligence. We look at nature, we look at the Tao. It's very natural for you to acquire the positive and useful out of both creative and destructive aspects of nature. So, what do I mean by that? I mean that there are certain aspects of nature that we commonly regard as good. Oh, look, a newborn baby. Babies are so cute. That's life. We regard life as good. When life flourishes, oh, puppies, kittens, those are manifestations of life, and who can disagree with that? Who doesn't love puppies and kittens? I'll raise my hand. I love them. I go to YouTube just to watch videos of puppies and kittens and babies. That too, we regard that as good. Now, we regard death as bad or scary. So we have horror movies, and the theme of horror movies is to use death as the fear factor, as the number one thing that drives the movie is that you don't want to die, you don't want to be horribly tortured and injured and then killed. So death we regard as being very negative. And yet, human intelligence looks at nature that's got both life and death and we make use of life and death. So, as an example, there's life in nature. There's all kinds of living things. There's fruits. There's grains. There's sustenance for us. So that life we can use to nurture ourselves, and that's a benefit. Food and water. That's a benefit for sure. What about death? Well, there's death in nature too, and we can also use that ourselves. So if we witness death, an animal has died, well, the human mind has figured out that the rotting carcass of the animal can be excellent. It can be excellent fertilizer for plants. So perhaps we bury that near some fruit trees, and then we know next year we can enjoy some outstanding fruits. We can benefit by extracting benefits from death. So that's the human mind, whether it's good or bad, good, quote unquote, bad, quote unquote, we can make use of it somehow. So there's a famous Zhuangzi story about, Zhuangzi with someone else, and that this other person wants to know where is the Tao. So Zhuangzi initially says, well, look at that tile, that roof tile, the Tao is there. And his friends did not understand. Well, that's a lowly thing. It's not a beautiful statue of the Buddha. It's not precious. It's not refined. It's not like jewelry. So how come the Tao is in that? And then Zhuangzi goes further and says, look at the little insects. The Tao is with them. So his friend, is even less understanding and is actually getting kind of annoyed, saying that, well, the ants so lowly, it's so tiny. Why is the Tao there, so insignificant? And Zhuangzi goes even further and says, well, the manure, the urine, the droppings, the Tao is there. So this completely angers his friend, who doesn't want to speak with him anymore. But Zhuangzi has a great point, though. We ourselves regard what we eliminate from the body as a very bad thing. So when things go south on us, our usual expression, one of the expressions that we use is oh crap. Why do we say crap? Well, because we think of crap as a bad thing. So we use that to indicate bad luck. And sometimes we say, don't give me none of that BS. Why do we say BS? Because we regard that as a very repulsive, negative thing. And yet at the same time, we also know that there's a very good reason why we would be so averse to defecation, to what the body leaves behind. It's because, well, the biological entity has already processed the food stuff. So what you eliminate, what you expel, that's no longer something that you're interested in. You should stay far away from that and go for other sources of food and not circle back to that. So the strong smell, the repulsive, the feeling of repulsion that we feel, that's actually a very good indicator. It tells you how to separate from good from the bad. So yeah, we need that smell. It tells us something that's very useful. So let's keep moving. So the human mind has the ability to work with nature in that way. So how about the sage? So the sage seeks to emulate nature and then to elevate it. So this is important. So for humans in general, the heavenly Tao, it's about intelligence. For the sage in particular, it's about wisdom. That's the next level up. So here's the contrast. I want to pull up both to compare and contrast. Humans use their intelligence to enjoy the benefits of nature while skillfully avoiding harm. So keep in mind, humans are accessing and using all of nature. The food versus the crap, life versus death, we use all of it to our benefit. And we use all of it to help us. Sages use their wisdom, not intelligence, wisdom, to provide assistance, or in other words, to give benefit to people while skillfully avoiding contention. So up here with the humans, extract benefits from nature. Down here with the sages, provide benefits to people. So hopefully you guys see the contrast between the two. That is the comparison and contrast between the Tao of heaven and the Tao of sages. So there's a reason why they're set aside that way. They are counterpoints to one another. So humans avoid harm in nature. Sages avoid contention among people. And contention is actually the important thing that I want to talk about, the very last thing. But then these are the two characters on non-contention. The first character is no or none. Second character is contention or contending. So literally, you've got this. And when you put them together, it's no contention or non-contention. No fighting. So these are the last two characters of the Tao Te Ching, and so they deserve special recognition. So at the state level, with kingdoms, with empires, etc., Lao Tzu expresses strong opposition to warfare. So contention at the national level would be war, would be battles, border conflicts. And that's chapter 30 is one example where Lao Tzu is not being ambiguous at all. He's being very emphatic and saying that, well, look, war is a bad thing, period. So that's at the state level. What about the personal level? So there, Lao Tzu is also opposed to people fighting against one another, waging war among ourselves, so to speak. But there's a little bit more to what Lao Tzu says at the personal level. So I want to focus a little bit on Zen, this character for contention. So when we look at it initially, oh yeah, fighting. We shouldn't fight. We shouldn't fight against one another. Okay, cool, got it. But there's actually more. It's not just animosity and conflicts. Then this particular character here, it's not just about contention, it's also about competition. When we compete in society against one another, stepping over one another to get us something. So, for instance, position. There are positions of prestige, positions of authority. People scramble to climb the ladder, to get higher, to climb higher than other people, to gain a higher position. So that is one aspect of Zen. Even when you're not fighting with other people, when you are scrambling and competing in the rat race, that is Zen. Scrambling, competing with one another for positions. Oh, you got a new car, I got a new sports car, and then someone else may come around and say, I got a new supercar, So people are constantly one-upping one another to show off what they have because what they possess appears to be a signifier as to what makes them feel superior. And then lastly, recognition. People who wish to be seen as virtuous, living the good life, enjoying great relationships, etc. And this recognition part, I see this most often in social media. So when people post something about how, look everybody, I'm enjoying my expensive vacation. Or look what my boyfriend has just done for me. Look what my wife has cooked for me, etc. So it's tough in social media to draw a clear line between what is keeping your friends and relatives informed of your current activities and veering a little bit off, crossing the line into the territory of showing off to everybody. Look, everybody, I'm living the good life. Look, everybody, I've got a great spouse. That sort of thing. that's where the ego gets involved. For me to be cautious, I just avoid posting anything because it could be misconstrued as a display of ego, and I do want to work on my ego. That's one of my primary goals in life. Okay, so at both the state and personal levels, the reason for contention is similar. And the reason is that you can't see how petty, how trivial that really is. And that extends not just to fighting, but also to competition. So lastly, let's review quickly the takeaways from 81. So previously, we talked about unpleasant truths, 信言, versus beautiful untruths, 美言. And previously, we also talked about the reasons why sages advise against debates, because it could be something that's very bad for inflating one's ego. And today, we focused on giving, or 施, that's the character there, the practice of generosity. So remember the three categories of 施. Think about what you can do, what all of us can do to practice each individual category. And let's not have just one category, limit ourselves to just one. All three categories are things that we can do. You know, it's not just contribution, donation, etc. That's really the least of it. It's also about sharing your wisdom with other people. To me, that's actually more important. And lastly, it's about taking action to help other people. And that dovetails nicely to this particular chapter, which talks about not only giving to people, but also the sages helping people. And that's what we all need to do. Emulate the sage, emulate the Tao, to give to others as well as to help or assist others. On that note, I'd like to bring our meetings to a close.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持家三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持家各位顶传11鞠躬，协班1鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.